How's it going, everyone? I am Dylan. This is my cousin Carlo. This is All You Can Board, and we are back for another Own It, Play It, Skip It. We have done, I don't even know how many of these now, 6 or 7 or something like that. It's become a popular series. We love doing them. So we're going to be looking at 6 games, 3 each, and ranking them, sort of these mini reviews on whether we think you should own it, just play it, or skip it entirely. I'm not even going to intro it anymore, aside from saying that if you haven't joined our Discord or want to support us in other ways like Patreon, all those links are in the description below. And with that out of the way, I'm going to toss it right to you to do the first game.
All right, thank you, sir. First game I'm going to be talking about today is one that you've actually spoken about recently in a couple different videos.
Yeah, I was going to say. I've spoken about it on the channel more than you have.
Yeah, exactly.
And now you're making up for it.
Yeah, and this is Fantasy Realms. So this is designed by Bruce Glasgow. I'm not familiar with any other games he's designed. It's the only one of his I've played. Published by WizKids. This came out, I think it was 2017 or 2018, but it kind of started getting a bit more buzz the last year or two because it only came out in Europe a year or two ago, so it was part of the round of Spiel nominations, I think last year or whatnot. Very simple game, plays for, it says on the box that it's 3 to 6 players, but technically you can play with 2 as well. There's a variant in there that plays slightly differently. The idea is that you basically, every player starts with a hand of 7 cards, and you're basically, on your turn, all you're doing is you're drawing a card either blind, face down off the top of the deck, or you're drawing one of the face-up cards in the shared discard pile that all the players can draw from. Basically, once there's 10 cards in the discard pile, it immediately ends the game, and then each player just scores based on how the 7 cards in their hand combine. So that's basically all the rules right there already. The cards just have different synergies on them. Every card can either have a bonus or a penalty on it, so it'll sometimes say like, this gives you, maybe 20 points, but it might give you minus 5 points for every flood card that you're holding in your hand. Or it might give you, plus 20 if you have this other specific card in hand with it. Like there's something called the Candle. It's worth 2 points. But if you also have, the Bell Tower and the Book of Changes, now the Candle gets plus 100. So there's these synergies you're trying to look for, and you never know if they're in the deck or you're waiting if someone else is holding them, that kind of thing. A lot of cool stuff going on. The 2-player variant, I think you basically, I can't remember if you either start with no cards in your hand and you're drawing multiple per turn, and I think the discard pile has to get up to 12 or 14, I think, before it ends. So it's a slightly different way that it plays, but I've actually heard, like our friends Jeff and Jamie from Foster the Meeple have talked about this game a lot, and they've actually mentioned that they prefer the 2-player variant. So I'll say right now, this one is going to be an own it for me. And the reason is, well, there's a few reasons. So, because the game, it's not a perfect game. There are some flaws. There's things like, if I was reviewing this in its own like standalone review, I'd probably be getting more into the criticisms of the game. But there's so much that this game has going for it outside of the way it actually plays that are just like. The benefits to having this game in your collection worth owning is that, first off, it's super easy to teach. So you can teach this game to anyone in like 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Very, very simple. It has a lot of replay value. You can play it with basically any kind of range of players because even people who don't play a lot of games, who might not be as good at games, like there's a reasonably high luck factor still that like everyone still has a chance to win. I really like that it takes up very little table space too, because of the fact that you're not actually playing cards ever. Like the game is what's in your hand. So the only thing that's actually on the table is the deck you're drawing from and the discards. So technically, you could even play this like without using a table surface and just have like, the discards in a little stack that you're passing back and forth. Like let's say you were sitting around a bonfire or you're on a train with someone traveling or on the plane. Like there's so many different
automobile.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there you go. But there's so many different ways to. I actually recently traveled. And so my wife and I went with our baby and also my sister-in-law, her partner, and their baby. So there were 6 of us. And while each couple was kind of holding a baby, the 4 of us played this sitting on a bed in a hotel. Like that just shows you how easy it is to get this game played in kind of any setting.
That's actually a variant in the rule book. It's called hard mode.
Yeah, it definitely was. Yeah, a couple babies screaming the whole time. But yeah, it's got the kind of, it's a pretty generic fantasy theme, and it feels like they kind of I would have liked to see a bit more like character in its own universe. Like there's certain cards that are just like dragon and like Beastmaster that are very general, and you're like, oh, I wish there's some type of story. And then there's like the Shield of Keth, and you're like, who's Keth? and you're like trying to get into it, but then it's just like candle, and you're like, I wish this world was more interesting. It had a little more flavor to pull me in a bit.
And you know what? It's not for me. It wasn't like those totally valid points. And for me, it wasn't necessarily even the names of the cards so much as it was the artwork. And there's nothing wrong with the artwork. Yeah. Like it's one of those situations like Ethnos where the artwork is. It's not like it's bad art. It's just that it doesn't have its own unique character.
Exactly.
With it. It just feels
it's not
kind of
inspiring,
generic.
right? It's just like
and I love fantasy themes, and I was thinking this before, but like if this had been Star Realms or something like that, like some kind of space realms, whatever, like if it had been like a full-on different theme, it might have resonated actually with me even a little bit less, even if the gameplay was 100% the same, just because I like some of the seeing some of the things that were coming out of my hand based on the fact that I like the
for
theme.
Sure.
But I would have liked it. I always use this comparison because I feel like it's a fantasy game that has a lot of like a very distinct style is Small World, right? Like you know
exactly.
It's Small World when you look at it because that is how they've done their take on things that are in tons of fantasy genres like orcs and goblins, all this kind of stuff, right? Skeletons and everything. I feel like that could have been cool to see here, and it makes me wonder, even though it's a now completely different theme, how I keep hearing people talk about it in the comments on our YouTube channel every time I mention this game, is the Marvel Remix version.
Right.
Where they're now, instead of it being dragon and stuff like that, I'd imagine it's going to be characters from the Marvel universe. Again, very different theme, and I don't know if the games are the same, but it'll be interesting to see this kind of framework of a game tied more into like a very specific unique theme rather than just like sort of just this is a fantasy theme.
For sure, and I think that would just make it come to life a bit more, and I don't know. It plays in like 20 minutes. Sometimes you can even play in 15. I like the fact that it's got the aspect of like some games you might start with a pretty good hand already and you're just trying to race to the finish and end the game quicker so you try and score. Other games you might start with zero synergy and you have no idea where to go and you're just trying to scramble together some type of synergy. Anyways, we've talked about it a lot on the channel, so I'll leave it at that. But yeah, this one is an own it for me. That is, again, Fantasy Realms.
Yeah, let us know also when if you would like us to see us cover at some point Fantasy Realms comparison to Marvel Remix. I'd be interested in getting that version, and we could even do a joint one where if I've spent time with that one, you spent time with this, we can compare them, see what the differences are, play them together and stuff.
Absolutely. So. I think there's also a deluxe version or some expansions already in the works, so I'm also curious to see, like, are those going to be a must once we try them, whatever. But anyways, lots of game in a very, very small box that plays very quickly. Fantasy Realms.
All right, first game I'm going to look at, a game I've talked about, well, I guess I talked about the expansion about on the channel, but this is not the expansion. This is the base game we're going to talk about, and this is The Loop. So The Loop is a game that we got, a few months ago, and it sat on the shelf for a while before we were able to get around to playing it, and Panasaurus Games had sent us the expansion to look at as well. It is a cooperative game in sort of the same style as Pandemic, and I say that in the sense that like there's going to be a bunch of stuff going wrong, a bunch of stuff you have to manage, and you're sort of just doing the best you can to manage everything that's going on while also trying to like forge ahead on your goals. But sometimes you feel like, oh, you haven't forged ahead on our goals this turn or next turn or whatever because we're too busy getting rid of red cubes or taking care of clones or whatever, depending on the scenario you're doing. So you're managing everything like that. You have a hand of cards that's essentially, it's a hand of cards, but it's essentially like a tableau on the table where you're just exhausting them to use their abilities. All these cards are unique. They're artifacts. They have their own unique abilities. Every starting character comes with their own set. There's a bunch of full deck of generic ones you can add to your deck throughout the entire game. When you add them, they go on top of your deck right away, so you're going to see them immediately. And you're essentially just trying to create complete missions. You have to usually complete around 4 missions to win the game. So you're going to be completing those. They'll involve things like getting rid of these red danger cube type things in different areas, or getting rid of clones a certain way, or surrounding the Dr. Foe. Is it Foe or Fox? Do we ever determine for sure which one it is?
As someone who speaks at least a bit of French, I'm gonna have to guess it's Foe.
Yeah, because otherwise it's Foxzilla, and that's for the expansion, which is not.
It's gotta be Dr. Foe.
Right. So yeah, honestly, I think I can speak for you on this too, is both of us kind of overlooked The Loop when it was first announced. Like, we knew it existed, we saw it being advertised, but none of us were jumping or chomping at the bit to go out and play it. You started hearing things about it. Pandasaurus reached out to cover the expansion. I think we said, yeah, you know what, like, let's grab a copy, let's see what it is. And it's a really fun game. It's good for a number of reasons. And the first one is because I think it is a pretty family-friendly game.
Yeah,
Not only in the theme, which is actually, like, the rulebook's really funny, and the theme comes out really strongly in the cards and the artifacts especially. Like, they're fun to read the names of, and there's some really great ones in there. So I think that aspect is, like, it's very playful and inviting, but also the gameplay being cooperative just lends itself naturally to, if you have someone who's a less experienced gamer, you can easily be helping them without feeling like I'm helping my opponent. It's like, no, I'm just helping them because it's a cooperative game. You don't have to do their turn for them. You don't have to, kind of take hold of everything, but you can be less imposing for someone than being like, oh my god, I have to do all these decisions and I could screw this all up for the team, whatever. So I think both those things it has going in its favor, and it's a lot of fun. It comes with 4 different scenarios in the box, and each one in the box scenarios are not as quite unique as the expansion ones. I think the expansion ones, that one of them eliminates missions completely, but they do change up the formula on each one, and it gives that more variability and longevity. So if you're coming back to it, you're not just saying, oh, we beat this game before. It's like, okay, but now we can try the next expansion. Now we can try it, in a harder mode, a difficulty and stuff like that. So this one for me specifically is going to be a play it, and that's mostly because I've played a lot of cooperative games. I really enjoy cooperative games, and this is one I had a ton of fun with, but I don't know after I've completed the scenarios in the box, or maybe even not all of them. I don't know how often I would personally be choosing to be the one to say, hey, I want to, have people over and play the loop. I would like to, there's some part of me that wants to keep it on my shelf and have it in my collection, because it is sort of that title that I can bring out in different situations for a variety of different types of gamers, where it is less imposing, and someone could be like, oh, I don't play board games very often. It's like, oh, I have a good game for that. So in some ways I lean towards that, like for that reason, saying it was going to be an own it, but I also feel like I have enough games like that already in my collection that it's hard for the loop to squeeze its way in. It's a great game. I would highly recommend playing it, and I think at that point make the decision whether you need to own it. But for me, it's not going to make it quite to an own. It's going to just stay to play for me. But I am pleasantly surprised. That's the biggest takeaway. It was a pretty big pleasant surprise this year. I know it didn't come out this year, but for games we played, in terms of my expectations not really being anything, and then finding out it was great. So
I agree with you on that. I would have also called it a play it. And I was also very surprised by this. I didn't expect much at all. Like, I think I generally like co-op games a little bit less than you. But I have to say, like, one of the most impressive things about this game is that it has, I think you mentioned that it has that feeling of a pandemic thing where you're kind of like, there's things happening, you're kind of putting out fires, right? Similar to Pandemic, similar to Spirit Island, whatever.
Yeah.
But this does something where it's like, it has more interesting stuff going on than Pandemic, because first off, especially game to game, because you don't just have a different character that has a different role, but like getting the different cards that you see, this artifact deck is so interesting. You get that variety from game to game through the artifacts and stuff like that. So it feels like there's more variety than Pandemic, but with a simpler rule set. Like, it feels like it's still easier to explain. It plays quicker, but yet it was still very challenging. I think we got absolutely destroyed on the first time we played it, which is always, for me, is a good sign. I want to lose the first time I play a co-op game. If you win the first time, I think that's a bad sign.
And we've got destroyed the first time. We've had a game where we like destroyed it, and we thought we were gonna have a lot more trouble.
But we were also on the easy difficult, and then we realized, oh, maybe we should have played on medium or hard or whatever. But
okay, so now I'm gonna put you on the spot. Tell all the fans at home, which game do you like better, the loop or Pandemic?
Ooh, well, considering we've been in the middle of a real life pandemic for like 2.5 years,
the theme just
right now I'm gonna have to go with the loop. But honestly, if you were asking me about Pandemic Iberia or the loop, I would definitely say Pandemic Iberia.
Right.
So thematic. But I want to ask you one quick thing. What would this take to, or is there anything you can think of and pinpoint to say if it had this, or if it was this type of experience or whatever, that would make it an own it for you? Or is it just like, that's just where it is for you no matter what, based on the design?
I'm sure I feel like anything that they would do to make it an own it for me specifically, based on my collection and everything, would end up making it a more complicated game, and it would lose some of which would make it lose what makes it so great now.
Right, is the accessibility.
I think like for me, I mean, more artifacts. That's one thing I mentioned. I want to see in the expansion. Maybe if I've seen some games do it where like you can go online and get like you don't need any other components. You can just download new missions, or Macro has like the ones where you can play on the website or whatever. Like maybe if they're like, hey, if it was a popular enough game and they were like, once a month we're gonna release a new scenario that uses all the base components, I'd be like, well, damn, like I'll do a scenario a month for a year, because I can play it solo too, right? So maybe at that point, but I think there's nothing wrong with it that's keeping it from being an own it. I think that's more just a me thing.
Yeah,
and I think for a lot of people, it'll be the co-op game in their collection. It'll be known for them. For me, it just doesn't quite get there, but I think that there's nothing wrong with it.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, I shouldn't say there's nothing wrong with it. It's not a perfect game.
Right,
but
right.
you know what I mean.
But yeah.
That is the loop, base game.
Cool. All right, next one I'm going to cover here is one I don't actually have the physical copy of, and I'll say right now, I haven't actually played the physical version of it. I've only played this on Board Game Arena, and that is...
I'm going to try
Dylan?
to,
Yeah, I know
to
that. I was going to
animate
say, you can get that,
Oh,
right?
man, let's see if I can do
Copenhagen.
that. Amazing.
Published by Queen Games. There's two designers. I don't remember their names. I haven't played any of their other games. So this is one that was on Kickstarter, I think a couple of years ago. I believe you were the one who told me about it when it was on Kickstarter, and it was around the time that there was a lot of polyomino games coming out all at once, right?
I wanted to back it. It was just,
I know.
It was just the thing of Queen's Games Kickstarter campaigns.
I know, exactly.
So damn expensive.
Exactly. And I remember I was intrigued by it too, but as soon as I saw the price, I didn't even really like look into the game all that much because I was like, polyomino game for whatever it was going like I don't remember the exact price, but I feel like with shipping it was getting close to $100, which was ridiculous to me. But now that it's on Board Game Arena, I thought, I finally get to try this out. So I've played it a few times now, and I was pretty disappointed. The basic gist of the game is you have a board where you're going to be, like, there's a row of cards. I think there's 7 cards in the row or 6 cards or something. And on your turn, you can either take 2 cards from the row that are next to each other, or you can spend cards from your hand. You can hold a max of 7 cards at a time, and they're all different colors, where you spend cards from your hand to buy a piece, a polyomino piece. There's limited numbers of each size and shape, and each color has certain unique shapes that belong only to that color. But you're basically either taking 2 cards or taking a piece and then putting that piece in your little tableau. And you're basically building a little building. And all the pieces, the polyomino pieces, like let's say the piece has 4 squares as part of it. 3 of those 4 squares will have like windows, and then the 4th one won't. And what you're trying to do in the game is you're trying to either create rows or columns that are completed that have all windows. So let's say there's like 12 spots in a column or whatever it is. If 11 of those 12 have a window, but one of them doesn't, you won't get the bonus. But if you get every single one in that column or row to have a window, you get bonuses. There's little things you can cover up that give you other little kind of bonus abilities that you can use that trigger on your turn that allow you to like use this ability, and it'll let you take 2 cards and buy a piece this turn, or it'll let you buy a piece for 1 less card than it would normally cost. So there's these little abilities you can get throughout that allow you to kind of like improve your efficiency and stuff. But it felt like there wasn't enough interesting stuff going on for me. Like, it just felt like there were things I'd seen in other games, but that felt like they were there, but not all that interesting. Like, just like creating a row or column of windows was like, I guess it's somewhat challenging, but it wasn't particularly like fun. I didn't go like, oh, this is really cool, I can't wait to play again and try and do better at this. It just felt like, I guess I could try and like focus harder on it next time and try to get that complete row, but like, is it really going to be that satisfying? Like, all you're doing is this loop of like Ticket to Ride style, like picking up cards until you have a bunch of cards in your hand, and it's like, okay, I have 4 of these purples, so I'll spend them to buy that size 4 purple tile and put it in here. It just felt a bit dry. This is definitely going to be a skip it from me. It's one that I like. I don't know if I would, because it was just Board Game Arena, there was no setup time, whatever. Like, I don't know if I would say I regretted my time with it, but I played it 2 or 3 times, and I don't think I have any desire to go back to it, and I certainly wouldn't really recommend it to anyone. I've played somewhere around 20, 25 polyomino games, and this is definitely one of the least interesting ones I've played. It's probably in the bottom 3 or bottom 5 of all polyomino games I've played.
Tell us what you really think.
And it's here's the thing, and it's not that it's like, it's not a bad game. It doesn't do anything particularly offensive or whatever, but it's just that thing that you kind of touched on at the start, is like, it's this kind of big box, fairly expensive game. They went on Kickstarter, asked for a bunch of money, and it just feels like if your game doesn't do anything new, and you're a relatively successful company that maybe didn't need to go on Kickstarter and all this stuff, and it's this kind of overpriced, overproduced game in an overcrowded genre where there's so many polyomino games coming out, there's people like Uwe Rosenberg who are like design masters, design these games, and then these guys come and design this game that feels like it just doesn't do anything all that interesting. I would hate for someone to go buy this game and then regret it later.
So how much do you, like, and like real question, I was wondering as you were saying this, so let's say like out of the 25 polyomino games that you've played, let's say you actually only played 2. and this was the third one you ever played, would that have really drastically changed your impression because you didn't have all the experience of these other games and all the novel and cool things they've done to go against? Like, is it more a case of like this existing at a time where now basically if someone's going to do a polyomino game, you can't just do a basic polyomino game because it's a genre that's been tapped so much that we've basically got to the point now where like roll and writes and polyominoes, for example, if you want to do a new one, do you have to come up with something new and unique to even release one kind of thing? Not even just for you specifically, just in general, to be a successful new game.
Kind of, and here's the thing, is because like a lot of design in general is like iterative, right? Someone's saying like, oh, I'm taking this idea that this designer did and I'm going to reiterate on it. I'm going to take this idea and put this spin on it. And it feels like there's almost no excuse for how relatively simple and like, for lack of a better word, like uninspiring the game feels to me. Like, because like Patchwork existed and A Feast for Odin existed already, and you know, like Baron Park and the Grand Car, like there's all these other interesting polyomino games out there, and it feels like they said, well, we're gonna make our other one, and it feels like the game, the purpose of creating the game was more because of like the aspect of like, oh, it's about Copenhagen, like it's
which is what
the
drew it
setting
to me.
and exactly, and that's the thing, is like a lot of the time when I see a game that is named after a country or a city, or it has a specific setting, sometimes that draws me in, even if the game itself doesn't sound like the mechanisms are going to be super interesting. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I might learn more about this place, or I might see, you know, the thematic tie to where this, like, but there was nothing about it that made me feel like, oh, I'm learning about Copenhagen, or this feels like it's, you know, there was nothing like personalized about the game. It just felt like a kind of generic experience, and when it was done, I just kind of went, well, I guess that was fine, but like,
and honestly, like what drew me to it
out
in the first place was the colorful nature of it, the Copenhagen ties, the way it looked. Like, I think in terms of table presence, I haven't seen the physical version, but everything I saw when I was considering backing it, like, looked really good. But you're right, like it's hard. I think specifically for polyomino games, it is hard to say we're going to do a simple polyomino game when you have a game like Patchwork that exists that is very simple polyomino game, but it is so tightly designed that and in some ways grueling at times, that and it's a small box that costs like what, like I'm sure you can get that for $20.
That's the thing,
right? Like how do you, it's hard to then say we're releasing a big box game that is in many ways simpler than Patchwork and less tight,
costs twice as much, takes up 3 times the amount on your shelf, takes twice as long to play, like all these things. And
yet, one quick little thing I wanted to mention, what I find is interesting is the reason I asked the question about like, can you not now just release a simple polyomino, is because I've thought about this specifically with video games, where, you know, my favorite genre growing up were JRPGs, specifically like turn-based, old-school style JRPGs, whether it be like the Super Nintendo ones or PlayStation, whatever. And it got to the point with them where now if someone releases a turn-based standard JRPG, the first thing you see in reviews and talking about is like, this is so uninspiring, like, you know, we're back to turn-based combat, all this stuff like that, which was back in the day was a limitation, and that's why they did it. And yet, like, I love that stuff. And so when someone does like an old school, like, just JRPG that like I can sort of sink my teeth into, like I just picked one up, I love it. But it's hard to then release a game like that and have it sell and be successful and everything. So like for board games, it's even tougher, because with the RPGs, you can be like, oh, but it has an amazing story. If you have a simple board game, like, your theme has to be so amazing, or the immersiveness of it has to be so good to somehow ignore the fact that this is just a very generic polyomino,
right? And
maybe board games can't even accomplish that. So I was just thinking that as you were talking, it's a very tough thing now, specifically for polyominoes and roll and writes, because of how many games
I was gonna mention roll and writes. If you just come up with one of those generic roll and writes, like, it's like, well, look at all the things that have been done differently already. Again, going back to the video game world for one quick sec, is just like those, like, think of like those 2D platformers that used to be popular back in the day. They kind of went out of style, and then they started coming back, even though we're into this age of like 3D gaming. But like, if they're done right, there's ones that have been successful. But if someone were to ask me, what's the hook? What's the interesting part of Copenhagen? Like, I would basically be saying like your windows lining up in a column or a row. Like, does that sound like you're like, oh, I really want to play that? Or does that just sound like,
I guess for someone who maybe is either new to playing board games or doesn't own or has played polyominoes, and like really loves the theme, maybe this is the polyomino game they have in their collection as their simple one. But
guess,
it's still hard to argue to paying that much when you can get other ones.
That thing, just go get Patchwork. Just go get Spring Meadow. Go get Isle of Cats. Go
Patrick
get
only plays 2, so maybe that's one thing. But
then go get Llama Land then.
I'm playing devil's advocate trying to save Copenhagen.
Get out of here. Go play it and you tell me.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, that is Copenhagen, and for me again, that is a skip it.
All right. Yeah, now you're making me do more, and I gotta animate that coming out. Jesus. All right. Next up for me is a game I have played, I think 6 or 7 times now, all in one sitting, and this is Decorum. So Decorum, I didn't actually know when I bought Decorum that it was basically a campaign game, and I say that loosely. It's a campaign game in the same way that My City is a campaign game. Like it's which I guess it still qualifies. It's not legacy. You're not, you can everything you do you can redo again with Decorum. You're not writing on anything. You're not ripping anything up. But it very much is meant to be played with the same people multiple times. So I think the 2-player game of this has like a 20 scenario campaign, and there's a separate envelopes for the 3 and 4 players, and they have a much smaller campaign. It seems like a game that was meant more so for 2 players, but it just happens to have 3 and 4 player modes as well, where it kind of shoehorns in this, not shoehorns, that's the wrong way to say it, but basically now you have roommates who have shared goals and stuff like that. The game is a game of interior design, but each player for the
technically it's a game of passive aggressive cohabitation.
That's what I'm gonna call it now. That's what you need to call it when you and your wife are doing stuff in the house.
Exactly. Yeah,
we're just going through passive aggressive cohabitation.
I love that kind of subtitle. It's great to have passive aggressive right in the subtitle of the game.
So basically there's this house board in the middle of the table with 4 different rooms. Every room can be one of 4 colors, and every room can hold 3 objects. Every object comes in 4 colors, but each object, I always get this wrong because each object has a type, but it also has like another association with it. One of the associations, not every color will exist for each object, but there'll be a lamp of every color, but then that lamp can be like modern style or like retro style, and each of those, like modern, won't exist for every single color, and that's important when it comes to having to put things a certain way. And basically every person, when you open an envelope, is going to get one of the 2 rolls, and you don't get to look at what the other person's roll is. You're going to read one side out loud, which is kind of like the story behind your character and why you're moving in together. Maybe you're a couple, maybe you're roommates, maybe like there's all these different, honestly reading the stories is super fun. And I was playing with Braden, who got really into it, and he would read it in like an accent and a voice of what he thought the character would be, and that was an added touch there. So you go on a role play, there you go. Dungeons and Dragons fan, it'll probably be for you. But it's really tough. Like you have secret goals, and so my goal might be the living room has to have a blue lamp, which is a simple goal. But then you can also have like the entire right side of the house can't have any modern items, and your left side of your house can only have modern items or something like that. But I am the only one who knows those goals. The person I'm playing with doesn't, and you can't communicate those except for specific moments where you're allowed to share one, and that's only if you're struggling later on in the game. And so you have to just communicate by when you do something. I might put a lamp in a room. The other person can say, and you can do it in character, like, "Oh, that's a great decision. I love that lamp there," or "Oh, that's stupid. Why would you put that lamp in that room?" And that is your communication of whether the goal is being achieved or not. And so you have to kind of be like, okay, every time I try to put a lamp in this room, they don't like it, so clearly I'm going to start guessing they don't want a lamp. But maybe it's just that the lamp styles I've been putting in aren't the lamp they want. So you have to you have a certain number of rounds that you can do this, and you have to constantly be trying to dissect what's going on while also trying to accomplish what you want to do, and then you're kind of going up against the wall by what they do and don't like. So it's pretty tough. It starts off mild, like we completed the first couple easily, and then it got to the point where on the last couple we did, like 6 and 7 or whatever it was, we'd be reading our cards and both of us would be going, "Oh my God, like how am I gonna do this?" And we never lost. We got them all done, but you can see the difficulty ramping up. Like I'm not done playing it. I'm sure with Braden I'm gonna finish the 2-player campaign, and then maybe at some point do a 3 or 4-player campaign. Would be great, but it's tons and tons of fun. For me, the tough thing with rating this, own a play it, skip it, is I wouldn't say that it was so good when I was playing that I was like, everyone needs to own this in your collection. But it's hard to rate a game like this a play because it's meant to be played with the same person multiple times to complete the campaign.
Right, to just try it out, you're not going to get the optimal experience out of it.
And so what I ended up landing on is I'm going to say play it because right now I ask myself, if I never played Decorum again, like say I lost the box or whatever, and I played those 7 times, would I be going, oh my God, I need to buy another copy to finish the campaign. And even though I want to see everything else that's in there, there's some other things you have to open and unlock as well. So there's new things that are going to be added in. It didn't resonate with me enough that I would absolutely need to finish the campaign, like say My City did, where I really wanted to like see the whole thing through.
Right.
So I'm going to say it as a play. However, if you are someone who like this kind of cooperative game, working together and over a campaign, opening up envelopes and in a really light theme, sounds really good. To me, this is almost the perfect couples game. Like in many ways, to sit down and to kind of take the idea of like stuff you've probably done, like doing interior design in your house, disagreeing on what goes in what room, and putting it down into a game where you get to play these different characters that have these really weird and out there needs and desires and stuff. It's honestly a ton of fun, and there's a really good problem solving aspect to it. So I would say play it if you're to in terms of how I think it should be, whether or not it should be in a collection, and whether I would absolutely have to have it on my shelf. But I have a feeling that after you play, you're probably going to want to own it, especially if there's someone that you live with in your house that you're going to be playing this with like constantly. It's a great game, really, really big surprise. Really glad I picked it up. I would highly recommend checking it out.
Cool. I really look forward to trying this one. I still haven't. I want to ask you though. So obviously this isn't the first game or anywhere near the first game. Like I think obviously games like Hanabi, Magic Maze, The Crew do that limited communication thing or no communication. How would you compare the like limited communication in this to those games? Do you like that more in this or less, or like or is there one of those that you would compare it most similarly to in terms of what you can or can't say? Or
yeah, it honestly compares pretty similar to all the limited communication games I've played, except for the fact that in this one I feel like I was never upset or mad that I couldn't communicate. Like it's very much the essence of the game. If you communicate your goal, it kind of in this case, I mean, like I said, it happens in a lot of games, but in many ways it just sort of ruins the experience because like the game is trying to figure out the needs of the person you're playing with. So as soon as you know them unintentionally because of giving it away, like the game is kind of, there is no game anymore.
Right. So it has that same aspect as the other games where if you're playing with certain people, they could bend the rules in a way that would make it easier, and then you'd be like, oh, come on, it defeats the spirit of the game kind of thing. Like
kind of. The good thing with this one is that like in other games, the hidden information will be you can't say anything. So if all of a sudden someone's going to do something and you go, oh, don't do that, like that,
right.
that
yeah,
seems wrong.
Exactly.
In this one, that's actually kind of what you're supposed to do. Like, yes, you're supposed to do it in character and say, no, I don't like that. But if you go like, oh, why would you do that? Like, that's actually what you're supposed to do.
Okay,
so it might be easier for people in that sense because you're allowed to make those communications as long as you don't be, as long as you're not like, oh, I don't want modern items there. Well, then like,
right. You can't say too much.
The last thing, that's a good point though. The last thing I'll mention is the only problem I have with this game, and another reason that keeps it from an own, is it is a really hard game to replay with other people, and you have to like let time pass. Because right now, if we were to sit down and play, which I would love to play the 2-player game with you, I need more time to pass because I remember what some of the goals were of Braden's role in those first 6, and that always stays the same. So if we sit down to play the first one, you won't know what any of my goals are, but I'll remember what some of yours were, and that's going to ruin the experience a bit. So I feel like if you want to play this, if you were looking for a game that you can play with multiple people, you'd have to like have like if 2 or 3 months passed, I'll probably forget what a lot of those goals were. Maybe there'll be a time we're playing, I'll remember something. Then it's a little bit easier.
So what you're saying is the worse your memory is, the more this game is worth owning?
Yes. So it's an own it if you have really bad memory.
If you're the main character from Memento, go buy this now.
You're going to love it. Yeah, that is Decorum. I had a great time with it. Can't wait to explore the rest.
Cool. All right, and the last game I'm going to be talking about today is a game I've had for about a year or so now, something like that, year and a half. This is called Undaunted North Africa. This is co-designed by Trevor Benjamin and David Thompson, published by Osprey Games. This is the second one in the series, I believe. They first came out with Undaunted Normandy. Now there's North Africa. They've also released Undaunted Reinforcements, which is an expansion that can combine both of the games and makes it go up to 4 players. This one's just 2-player only. That Reinforcements also comes with a solo mode. They also recently announced Undaunted Battle for Britain, which I think is going to be like dogfighting, like in planes, basically. So it's this whole system that is clearly being expanded upon, and I imagine this is going to be like a game system that they're going to continue making more versions of. So, and just changing the settings and maybe the way the combat happens. But and I should really quickly add that these same designers also did War Chest before this, which War Chest was kind of like a bag building skirmish game, and this one's deck building. So
Yeah.
the idea is they're scenario based. I think there's 11 scenarios in here, and basically it's kind of like it's asymmetric. It's the Italians against the long range desert group, set in 1940, and the idea is every scenario is going to tell you basically which units, basically like riflemen, scouts, whatever, which ones are going to be available for use in that particular battle for you and your opponent. Something this game introduces as well as vehicles, whereas in the first game in Normandy there was only just the actual like ground units or whatever. And I haven't played Normandy, I should mention real quick. And here's the thing, you can do this in scenario format, or you can do like mini campaigns where you basically choose scenarios in advance. Like I could sit down with Dylan and say, hey, we're going to play scenario 3, 5, and 8, and then we'll just add up the points from those 3, and that'll be our mini campaign or whatever. So there's a lot of different ways to play the game, but yeah, you basically have a deck of cards that represent those units, again, your scout, your engineer, your machine gunner, whatever. And they have different abilities on them, and every round plays where you basically start by each player draws 4 cards. Then of your 4 cards, you're each going to pick one secret, and then you flip them over once you've each decided, and the number in the corner is going to be the initiative that determines who goes first in that round. And that's a big deal, because every round out of those 4 cards, you have to pick one of those cards is going to be your initiative. So it determines your initiative, and then you set it aside. You don't get the abilities or anything else on the card, and then you actually get to use your other 3 cards. But whether you go first or second makes a big deal in this game, because you're obviously trying to defeat the other player's soldiers and stuff, but there's usually objectives, right? Like either blow up these demolition sites or control these sites with your units or whatever, get there first. So there's kind of like a timing aspect of sometimes you think, oh, I want to go first this round because I want to blow this thing up, or I want to get in position before my opponent gets there. But other times maybe you want to attack them and you think they're too far away, so I want to go second because they're going to move forward in my range, and then if I go second, then I can shoot their guys down once they've come into range or whatever. So honestly, when I first heard about the Undaunted series in this game, I hesitated for a while to even try these games, because you and I both have very almost zero interest in games with war themes, right?
That was gonna be my comment after is for me that's the biggest battle with there's only certain games, video games, board games that have I can't even think of the word, but basically have got to the point where the theme doesn't matter because the game's so much fun. Yeah. One I can think of is Airline and Sea. I was able to ignore the theme on that just because I really like the simplistic nature of this.
Right.
My biggest struggle with this is it's not that I didn't enjoy it. It was just that the theme is so ingrained in so much of what's going on and is so important to it that I just I couldn't get invested in the game properly, and that made it harder for me to come up with strategies and get into the rules and all that kind of stuff. That's honestly the biggest barrier for me personally is the theme. I'm just not into the movies. And honestly, I'm not really into war movies that often.
And I totally agree with you, and that has been the biggest barrier for me in terms of getting this back to the table over and over, whether it's my own interest or the interest of people I've played it with, because I played the intro scenario with you, and we both enjoyed it, but we never went back to it. And then I played the intro scenario or 2 scenarios with someone else. He enjoyed it as well, a decent amount, but never requested to play it again. We never went back. And then I played the intro scenario again with a 3rd person, and then he and I played, I think, 5 scenarios or something. But again, we haven't gone back to it either. And it's I don't want to keep introducing people to this intro scenario and playing the same ones over and over. Yeah. But I also, nobody I've showed it to has fallen in love with it. And to be fair, I also am not super compelled to go back to it because of the theme. But in terms of what it does as a deck building game, here's what I'll say, okay? I'll say right now, it's a play it for me. Because of the theme and the scenario aspect of it and the long setup time with finding these tiles and figuring out how to set them up and which configuration and stuff, it holds it back from being a game that I'm going to want to play over and over. And it's especially the theme, I would say. But if you're someone who hates war games, you have no interest in this stuff, but if you really like deck building games, there's some really cool stuff that they do here that I haven't seen in other deck building games that I think this is worth at least trying just to see what it does as a deck builder. Because let's say you have your 1 rifleman on the battlefield. You don't have multiple riflemen. You only have 1 of each unit, but you have multiple rifleman cards in your deck. And let's say my opponent shoots my rifleman. I first have to look in my hand. If I'm holding a Rifleman card in my hand, I trash that card from my deck. It's basically how many hits can my Rifleman take. That's how many Rifleman cards I have. So every time you get shot, you lose a card from your hand, or then you lose it from your discard pile, or then you have to search your deck and remove it. And only when all of your Rifleman cards are gone, you actually take that Rifleman piece off the board, and now your Rifleman is actually dead because he's been shot down a certain number of times.
I like that.
That's
that was
really
cool,
cool,
played,
right?
yeah.
Deploying units. Using abilities with your scout that make you add Fog of War cards to your opponent's deck, so when your opponents draw them, they don't do anything, they're just clogging them up, sort of like you're throwing a smoke bomb off. Like, there's all these interesting things. I like the way that the combat, like the dice is only used for combat. It's very basic. You roll a 0 or anything higher than what your opponent had, and you defeat them. So there's little ways to come back into the game when you feel like you've fallen behind. Interesting battles. I've enjoyed it every time I've played, but yeah, it's that theme and the scenario-based aspect that just, like, I don't think it's worth me personally owning long-term in my collection. Yeah. So I'm really glad I played it. I'm going to hold on to it for at least a little while longer and see if I played a couple more times maybe, but I don't think it's going to stay in my collection long-term, even though I'll basically like gladly play anything that these designers design like going forward now, just based on the strength of this game as well as some of their other designs.
Yeah, biggest takeaway here is you need to stop being a coward, and when you introduce it to people, just start with the very last scenario every single time.
Yeah, right into vehicles, all kinds of crazy stuff right off the bat. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, that is Undaunted North Africa. Excellent game, worth trying.
All right, buckle up. Here's a big one I've been waiting to talk about. Finally finished the entire campaign. This is King's Dilemma.
Nice.
You've heard me talk about campaign games probably a lot in this channel. It's one of my favorite genres of games.
We actually just talked about 3 that have scenarios.
Yeah, that's
Decorum,
true.
Undaunted, and now this one.
This is like the scenario version of... And actually, I guess almost the loop
The
does,
loop technically had scenario. Yeah.
All right, so King's Dilemma is a huge campaign game. It lasts usually between 12 and 15 sessions. You'll likely do a session at a time, but some sessions can go as short as like 45 minutes, 40 minutes or less. We had one that was so short we ended up doing a bunch of scenarios one day. So it's a game of... you're members of the King's Council, and you're going to be given story cards that are going to give you different things you have to vote on that are either you're voting aye or nay, and it's going to be things for your kingdom, things for that's going to affect the world the kingdom in some way. It gets pretty dark at different times. The story is very serious. It's not a playful story. You can tell right from the side. This guy is just stressed beyond belief. That's going to be what you're feeling like when you're playing the game sometimes. And you're essentially the main mechanic of the game that you're doing is you're just voting. You're going to be going around and starting with whoever has the leadership token, and you're going to be casting votes for either aye or nay, and you're placing power onto the vote, which is the strength of the vote that you're doing. Other people can then vote against you and add more power. Depending if the power shifts from one vote to the other, from like say I start with aye with 2 power, the next person goes nay with 3. They immediately become the leader, and that means that the round of voting can never end until you get to the right of the left of the leader, which means that I would have a chance now to up the vote because I'm losing. So there's this really good push and pull of like how badly do you want the vote to sway a certain way based on what you want to happen in the game. And the reason you're doing all this voting is you have a house, and you have a house with its own secret goals and that are going to last for the entire campaign that you're trying to accomplish. But in each game is essentially one lifetime of your house. So imagine and it's one reign of a king. So imagine that this game we play lasts 40 years or 30 years or whatever. And so I am a single member of my house in this age that has a goal that is very much potentially at odds with what is the goal of my house. Think about if you watch Game of Thrones, like Littlefinger always conspiring and stuff like that. Like there's roles that pretty much feel like that, where even though my house wants to accomplish this time I have a card that says my goal is actually at odds with that because my member of my house is very different. So you're trying to win the session by influencing these markers on the map with the vote, but at the same time you're trying to keep in mind your overall arching goal of the campaign and still trying to aspire towards that. So that is really interesting, that you don't just have this like one focus that is going for the entire game. You do have to shift it up a lot. But the story is super interesting to follow. There's like different threads. You'll have these different piles of story cards, and depending on which ones come out, you'll be furthering different story threads or having one that kind of takes a back seat depending on what cards you're pulling. They are really interesting to follow. They all sort of have their own paths. You won't open up. There's tons of envelopes in this game. I think there's like 90 envelopes or something, little envelopes, some absurd amount. But you won't open them all because there's different branching paths and everything. And at the same time in these stories, every house is going to have their own secret one overall goal. And so I won't get into spoilers or anything, but I'll just say what mine says, but they're very vague. So mine was achieve, I think this is what it was just achieve immortality or discover the secret of immortality. And the reason my house wants to do that is because my house is obsessed with working. Work is life is their motto. They just want to work to be able to provide for their family and for the next generations, but they never actually have time to enjoy the life that they're making. So they want immortality so that after they've done all this stuff, they can actually enjoy it. So the thematics are really cool that way, but I don't know how to accomplish this goal. There's no directions given. I just have to listen to the story, and I have to listen for little threads. I'm like, okay, that actually could lead me to immortality. And so now my vote is going to start influencing wanting to go down that path. But everyone else is doing the same thing, and that's just one aspect of how you're influencing the story. So it's just so much fun not only to listen to the story and see how it evolves, but also to follow from your lens of the house you're controlling and the things you want to do. And I will say that what makes this game is when I first came into it, I thought, like, where is the game? Like, we're just voting. That's all we're doing.
Sitting on a table talking and voting, yeah.
But it's if you have the right group for it, and honestly, I would not recommend playing this with like people you don't know well, or at least you should have some sort of rapport around the table with some people.
Right.
You need to you don't need to get fully into character, but you need to embrace your house. You need to embrace where the story is going to go, and you need to just have those like really fun, interesting, debates and aggressive conversations at times.
Yeah, but like the ethical side of what you're doing, yeah.
And just like you'll be trying to convince everyone to do something awful in this kingdom, like not abolish slavery or something like that, and yet me as a person, I would never want to do that, but as my character in the house, I'm like, oh my god, like, am I really going to do this to further my house's goal, or am I going to ignore my goal this time and sort of just go with what's best for the kingdom? Because even my goals might end up putting stickers on the board that are negative goals that I have to, or negative things that have affected the kingdom that I have to sign. Mm-hmm. And so if I do something like create an unnecessary tax on the poor that's going to affect their livelihood, I might have to sign a sticker that says I did that, and it's on the board for everyone to see for potentially the next 4 sessions, right? So honestly, in terms of campaign games, it's one of the more unique ones I've played. The whole voting aspect is so much fun. The way the story is integrated is super great. The immediate goals of the person you're playing and your overall house, following these secret goals for your story, it's so much fun. This is a definite own for me, not only because it's a campaign game and a big one that you're going to want to come back to, but I honestly think it's a campaign game that for anyone interested in campaign games, you should probably check out because of just how different it is from games like, Gloomhaven and most and like Aeon's End Legacy and Pandemic Legacy. Like it's from all these type of like legacy campaign games, it set itself apart for me and quickly sort of pushed itself to the top of the campaign games that I've played, or near the top, I should say, just on how much fun I had. I will never forget the discussions we had around the table and the laughs we had around the table on the decisions that were being made. Me not achieving my story goal, I never ended up achieving it because someone else had to push the story down a different path to get theirs, and so I never discovered immortality. And that round of voting was just super intense, and like me just pushing all my power I could possibly do to try to get that to go a certain way and failing. I won't spoil what any of these are, but there's twists and turns, not in the story, but in the gameplay mechanics. So all of a sudden you think you know it all. You open up an envelope that adds cards to the deck that are these unique one-time events that you're still voting, but now you're voting on very different things. And it's a game that I think anyone interested in this type of style of game should experience. You don't have to have, we play often with a full party of 5, but you don't have to play with 5. The more people you have, I would say the better it is for this game. But I think it's still great as like a 3 or 4 player game as well, just because of the fact that it's not just like, oh, the vote 1 2 to 1. Like you can influence with power, so that with 3 players it still works. Awesome game. I love King's Dilemma. As soon as Queen's Dilemma comes out, we're going to be doing another campaign. Cannot wait to check that one out either.
Oh, I need to play this game. I'm so like, I need to probably get my own copy. I talked about another video before about probably getting my own copy because I really want to be able to experience this game. But yeah. I have to say, so first off, I was almost expecting you to call this a play it, which would have probably been unfair, but it's because of the format of these own it, play it, skip it's.
Yeah.
And what I was going to say is I think this has to go into a 4th category, a new one that we've never before used, that is for these types of games.
Right.
You know what
like, is it because
it's not own it, it's not play it, it's not skip it. It is
I don't know what word you're going to use, but are you coming up with this because of the fact that like after it's done you can't play it again?
Yes.
So
the fourth is gift it.
Gift it.
Because you're not sitting here thinking that you wish you owned this now, because you can't replay what's in the box.
But I can't gift it either because
no, you can't gift it once it's been played. But
oh,
that's the thing.
I see.
If you wouldn't want to just play it because you wouldn't get to play through the campaign. But if you owned this would be a useless game to you now. But see, if you gifted it to someone and you got to play through the campaign with them, then you still get to play the whole thing, but you don't have a useless game on your shelf.
I think this is a bigger sticking point for you than it is for me with campaign games because that's come up with, I think, like a couple of times we've talked about like My City. My City has a mode to play afterwards.
Right.
We talk about like, oh, well, it's done. It kind of just sits there now. Like I have multiple campaigns.
Well, yeah, you have Gloomhaven there.
I have Pandemic Legacy Season 1 and 2 and stuff. Like to me, it's almost like I might not keep it forever. At some point, I might get rid of it and get rid of those games may just mean having to throw them out because I can't give them to someone else. But I like keeping them there for the nostalgia. Even just seeing them on my shelf, I immediately remember the entire scenario I had.
For sure. But you're not thinking about future Dylan having to make room for future games later. I'm thinking about future Carlo, and I don't want him to have to get rid of games later to make space.
I will say that having played 15 scenarios of this, I think it was 15, 14 or 15 that we got through it. 15 scenarios. Each one taking, anywhere between 45 minutes to 2 hours. The amount that I got out of this game, like, it's... I've gotten more time out of this game than most games on my shelf. Sure. So, sorry, I should say I don't own this copy. This is a friend of mine's copy. We were playing with his. He lent it to me to do this. So I should ask him if he's planning to keep this or now or what. But
and I didn't mean that as a criticism towards the game itself, to be fair. I was just saying that it's almost... Yeah, that Own It, Play It, Skip It is a tough way to analyze a game like this that has like a one-time playthrough. But what I want to ask you is, let's say I bought a copy of King's Dilemma and I needed someone else to fill a spot in the campaign. Is this a game that you would be interested or you would consider playing through again? Or do you think you've seen too much that you think you would have, like, that you would affect the game or the campaign, the group in a way that would kind of tarnish the experience for the rest of us? Like,
there's no doubt that I would love to play it again, even just to see what it's like with a different group dynamic and everything, and to play a different house with different goals that I'm not aware of. I wonder, I don't think I would ruin the experience for anyone with having played it, but the story is going to land very differently because I know where the story... I mean, I guess you can have different directions it goes. So you know what?
And do you think you would have an unfair advantage in terms of like knowing how to get points or knowing more like what's going to happen at the end for how to like possibly win? Like any...
I mean... I guess I should mention, like, I won't say what happens when you get to the end of the last scenario, but I think this game suffers from the same thing that My City suffers from, and a lot of campaign games do. Like Charterstone and everything. The end of the game, seeing who won, is always, I think, in many ways going to be anticlimactic for these games.
Right.
When you end a video game, you get this cutscene, you get this, like, ending story beat. For board games, all it's ever going to be is you read the conclusion, which can still be valuable and fulfilling, but it's just going to be like however this game is deciding that it's going to calculate points. And in many ways, you almost have to go in knowing I have to put my expectations down for what that last beat is going to be like, and just enjoy the entire ride and just be like, and it'll be interesting to see who wins the campaign, less than what's the ending going to be.
And it's interesting because and that comes down more to your imagination, whereas like video game, like you said, can have sound and visuals and all this kind of stuff to tie it together. But
yeah, I would absolutely love to play it again. I think I would just have to get to a point where I'm okay knowing certain story elements, and then more so being curious where everyone else is going to vote at times to see if the story goes in different directions that I'm aware of. And at that point, then I'm in the dark just as much as everyone else.
Right. Okay. So maybe you just need to wait a while, like with Decorum.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll buy it and I'll just tell you we're starting the campaign in like a year or something.
If you get it and start a campaign at some point in the future, I will very likely be interested in joining. Even if, and I should say, the drop in drop out is really easy with this. We had someone drop in and out frequently. Cool. So even if I don't join for everything, being able to join and play some to see what the voting and stuff is like with a different group would be really fun.
Cool.
That is King's Dilemma.
Awesome.
And that's everything. Thank you so much for watching. Let us know in the comments, as always, what you think of these games, if you played them, if you agree with our verdict or not. And we'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.